The Desideri mansion had 43 rooms, and I had learned to disappear inside all of them. 3 months working there, and most of the staff hadn't learned my name at all. It wasn't complicated. Anna, 2 syllables. But you have to notice someone before you think to ask. To the housekeeper, Signora Bettini, I was simply the babysitter. To the security team, I was the girl with the badge. To the groundskeepers, I was the woman who appeared at the side entrance every morning without making a sound and vanished the same way by night. I preferred it that way. My job was Lorenzo and Caterina, 7 and 5, the Commendatore's children. I arrived each morning at 6:30, dressed them, fed them, kept the peace between them during homework. I read to them in the yellow sitting room while men in dark suits moved through the lower floors, their voices reaching me as pressure against the walls, not as words. I learned which corridors to avoid after 11. I learned that the study on the 2nd floor had a soundproofed door that still let 1 word in 3 pass through if you stood at the wrong angle. I never stood at the wrong angle. The Commendatore himself I had seen exactly 9 times in 94 days, passing in the corridor, once in the garden from a distance, once when he appeared in the nursery doorway at 9:30, not to speak to me, only to confirm his children were asleep. He glanced at me the way a man checks that a window latch is closed. Present, noted, irrelevant. I watched him the same way I watched everything in that house, with great care, and without letting it show. I needed this job more than I needed to be seen. My father's name was Pavel Petrov. He had built things his entire life: apartment frames, parking structures, scaffolding rigs on buildings he would never be invited inside. In March, a support brace failed on a construction site near the Port District. He fell 14 feet. He survived, which the foreman called fortunate, as though surviving and being whole were the same thing. They were not. 2 lumbar vertebrae, compressed. The surgeon used the phrase functional compromise 3 times in that consultation, and I made him explain it twice before I understood. My father would not walk without pain again, unless someone replaced what bone could no longer hold. The surgery cost $54,800. He had been working off the books. The site held no insurance filing in his name. The contracting company dissolved 18 days after the accident. I confirmed this because Mara confirmed it first, called me at midnight, and when I arrived at her apartment, she had already printed the dissolution record from the business registry and laid it on the table like evidence. Mara was 23 and angrier than I was. She worked nights at a call center in the lower district and sent money home every month in amounts that cost her something she never named. I sent more. Between us, we had covered our father's pain medication, the specialist visits, and the physical therapy sessions that slowed the deterioration without reversing it. We had not covered the surgery. The Desideri position paid 3 times my previous rate, transferred every Friday, on time, without exception. No strange requests, no questions about my schedule. Just 2 children who needed someone reliable, and I had spent my whole life being exactly that. I counted the months the way my father counted the ceiling tiles from his bed. 4 more months at this salary. If nothing shifted, if Mara's lease held, if the specialist kept the surgical window open. 4 months, and we would have enough. That night, I left at 9:50. Lorenzo had asked for 1 more chapter, and I had read it, because he was 7, and because I had learned to give small things freely when I could afford to. The rain started before I cleared the gate. I didn't run. The bus stop was 6 blocks, and the umbrella I carried had a broken rib on the left side that let water in at a slant. I walked with my badge tucked beneath my coat, my bag pressed against my hip, and the street lamps smearing orange and gold across every puddle I stepped around. The street was empty. The city was holding its breath. I should have noticed that sooner. I made it home that night. I say that because later it would matter that I had noticed something and filed it wrong. 4 mornings in a row, the same presence near my route. Not the same man each time, but the same quality of stillness. a figure at the edge of Piazza Mercato, facing away from nothing. Someone at the far end of the loading bay walkway, already gone by the time I was halfway through. Once near the florist's yellow shutters, hands in pockets, no visible purpose. I told myself it was the neighborhood. Piazza Mercato ran on early hours, loading bay workers, vendors, men with unusual schedules. I was not the only person awake before sunrise. I was wrong to let it go. At 4:50 the next morning I got up, made coffee I left untouched on the counter, and dressed in the gray coat I wore every working day. I put the lanyard around my neck, the Desideri badge on its white cord, the household crest embossed small and clean on the plastic face, and clipped it to the inside lapel the way I always did. Accessible for the gate scan, not visible until needed. I left the apartment at 5:10. The street was quiet in the way early mornings are quiet in this part of the city. Not empty, just unhurried. A delivery van idling on the corner. A woman with a dog moving fast against the cold. The sky the color of old iron, not yet deciding whether to lighten. I turned onto my route. Down the Via Corelli, past the shuttered florist, around the edge of the market square. The clock above the archway read 5:15 when I reached the opening of the loading bay walkway. The corrugated steel awning overhead, the ground still dark with last night's rain, the far end framing a narrow rectangle of pre-dawn street. 4 minutes saved. I went in. I was 2/3 of the way through when I heard them step in behind me. 3 sets of footsteps. No hesitation. No performance of coincidence. I stopped before they said anything. Not because I was afraid. Not yet. But because my body understood the geometry before my mind did. One entrance filling with presence behind me. 30 feet of closed walkway ahead. One exit I hadn't cleared. I turned. The one in front was mid-20s. A jaw that had healed from a break slightly off-center. Construction jacket, unzipped. His eyes went to my lapel first, to the place where my coat had shifted and the lanyard was just visible above the collar. And something in his expression settled, the way a man looks when he has found what he came for. Behind him, against the left wall, a taller man, leaner, arms crossed, watching without contributing. And behind me, I heard him rather than saw him, the third one, close to the entrance, blocking it without being obvious about it. "Early morning," the first one said. I said nothing. "You work for the Desideri house." He said the name the way people say things they already know, not things they're asking. "I work there," I said. "I'm heading in now." "You can head in." He took one step toward me. "Leave the badge." I understood then. Not robbery. This was too deliberate. Too positioned. They had been watching my route for days. They knew my schedule, my exact departure time, the specific shortcut I used to save 4 minutes. They had come for the badge because it was proof. Not proof to open anything. The household security system was biometric. A stolen card opened nothing. But proof that someone connected to the Desideri household was reachable, accessible, a vulnerability that could be delivered to someone who needed to know it existed. "The badge won't open anything," I said. "It's tied to my biometrics." "I know," he said. He took another step. I moved back and turned slightly, not fleeing, calculating, and my heel caught the lip of the drainage channel running along the base of the wall. I didn't fall. I caught the wall with my left hand and pushed off it, and in the fraction of a second that cost me, his arm came up. The elbow caught me below the right side of my ribcage. The sound was internal, not a crack, more like something dense shifting against itself in a way it was never built to. Pain came a half-second late, then all at once. Deep, pressing, precise. The kind that doesn't scatter but concentrates and stays. I went to one knee. My bag hit the concrete. I pressed my right hand flat to the ground and focused on the cold, the texture, something fixed to push my mind against while my body decided how bad this was. Behind me, the third man made a sound. Not a word. A held breath. The sound of someone who had been told what this job was and had just discovered it was something else entirely. The one with the crooked jaw crouched and pulled the lanyard from my neck. The clasp snapped. He straightened. He looked at me for a moment. Something moved through his expression. Not guilt, not quite. The recalibration of a man who intended a demonstration and produced something heavier. He closed his fist around the badge. "Walk away from this," he said. Then he went past me, and the other two followed, and their footsteps faded through the walkway and dissolved into the street beyond. I stayed on one knee for a full minute. The pain was specific. Too far in to be surface, too fixed to scatter. It returned with every breath at exactly the same point. Same depth, same pressure, the way a fracture does, not a bruise. I breathed as shallow as the air would allow and counted to 10. I stood up. I picked up my bag. I walked out of the loading bay walkway into the gray of the morning and stood at the edge of Piazza Mercato while the city finished waking around me, indifferent, unhurried, unchanged. My badge was gone. The gate scan would flag it in 90 minutes. I started walking. Mara's light was on. I saw it from the street, the yellow square of her kitchen window above the dry cleaner's awning, exactly where it had been every morning for the past 8 months. She worked the overnight call center shift and usually got home around 5. On most mornings, I was already on the bus to the Desideri mansion by the time her kitchen light came on. Today I was standing below it. I pressed the buzzer twice. She came down in 30 seconds. Still in her work clothes, the pale blue shirt, the call center lanyard clipped to her collar, her hair pulled back the way she wore it for the headset. She opened the door, looked at me, and her expression did what Mara's expression always did when she understood something before I said it. It went very still. "Get inside," she said. "I need to be at work by..." Inside. I went inside. The kitchen was small and warm, the overhead light too bright, the table covered in whatever she'd been doing before her shift. She turned me by the shoulders, looked at my face, then at the way I was holding my right arm slightly in and breathing slightly shallow, and said, "Where?" "Right side. Below the rib cage." She pressed 2 fingers against my coat, found the point without asking me to guide her. We had grown up close enough that she knew the architecture of me. And I made a sound I hadn't intended to make. "Urgent care," she said. "If I'm late?" "You're already late." She was pulling her keys from the hook by the door. "Come on." The clinic on Via Oberdan was a 24-hour walk-in. At 5:35 in the morning, it held 2 other patients, a man with his hand wrapped in a kitchen towel and a teenager asleep across 2 chairs with his mother watching him. The intake nurse logged me in under 2 minutes. A physician appeared within 15. His name was Dr. Cordy, the on-call physician, thorough without being slow. He pressed 3 points along my right side and noted which one made me involuntarily hold my breath. "I want imaging," he said. "There's something there." "I have 40 minutes." He looked at me, then at Mara, who gave him the look she'd been giving authority figures since she was 16, the one that said, "She means it. Work with it." He worked with it. He documented the injury in careful clinical language. Blunt force impact, right lateral thorax, probable rib fracture, imaging strongly recommended, and gave me a printed copy of the report, a prescription for an anti-inflammatory, and a folded sheet about breathing techniques I should not attempt. "Follow up today if you can," he said. "The imaging matters." "I understand," I said. I folded the report and put it in the zippered pocket of my bag. Proof, the first piece of it. Mara drove me toward the mansion in silence for the first 4 blocks. Then she said, "Who were they?" "I don't know yet." "Yet," she repeated. "Yet." Another block passed. "Random?" "No." She didn't ask anything else. She knew what no meant, and she knew I wouldn't say more until I had something solid enough to say. That was the thing about Mara. She was angrier than me, but she wasn't reckless. She understood the difference between reacting and moving. She pulled up to the service entrance at 6:48. "I'll call you at noon," she said. "I'll answer," I said. I got out. She waited until I was through the gate before she drove away. Signora Bettini was in the service corridor with her clipboard. She looked up at my footsteps. "You're late." 18 minutes, I said. "And I need to report my badge. It was taken from me this morning." She looked up fully then. Not at my face, at the way I was moving. 3 months of watching me arrive on schedule, coat straight, pace even. Now I was 18 minutes late, and holding myself differently, and she was, whatever else she was, a woman who noticed things. "Taken," she said. 3 men, loading bay walkway behind Piazza Mercato, 5:15 this morning. I unzipped my bag and produced the folded injury report. "I have documentation." She took it. She read it. She handed it back without comment. The clipboard went under her arm. "Go see to the children," she said. "I'll make the call." I went upstairs. Lorenzo was awake at his desk in his pajamas, a picture book open upside down in front of him. He looked up when I came in. "You look different," he said. "I'm fine," I said. "Let's get you dressed." He accepted this with the complete trust of a 7-year-old who has decided an adult is safe. I helped him with his shirt buttons using mostly my left hand, and he didn't notice, and the small, ordinary mercy of being trusted without being examined held me together for the 20 minutes it needed to. 2 floors below, a door opened, then boots on the service stairs. Antonio, the Desideri head of security, moved with the heavy measured pace I had learned to identify in 3 months of listening to this house, purposeful and unhurried the way a man is when he already knows exactly where he's going. He was coming to find me. Antonio found me in the nursery corridor 20 minutes later. He was built the way a certain kind of man gets built after 20 years of making sure things don't happen. Broad through the shoulders, economical in motion, with the stillness of someone who has learned that stillness is information. He looked at me the way he had probably looked at 100 situations before deciding what they required. "Bettini told me," he said. "Walk me through it." I walked him through it. The route, the walkway, the time. 5:15, I said, and he wrote it. The 3 men, the badge, the documentation from the clinic. I told him it wasn't random. I told him they had known my schedule, my exact departure time, the specific shortcut I used. I told him the badge was taken as proof, not access. He was quiet when I finished. The kind of quiet that isn't emptiness, but processing. "You have the report with you." I gave him a copy. He read it with the same economy he did everything, no expression wasted, no detail skipped. He folded it and put it in his jacket. "I'll need the original too. I'll get you one today." He looked at me for a moment, not with sympathy, with reassessment. The look of a man reclassifying a variable he had previously filed as low risk. "The Commendatore will want to hear this," he said. My pulse moved. Once, harder than I let show. "When?" I said. "Tonight. After the children are down." He turned and walked back down the corridor without waiting for my answer. There was no question in it. The children went down at 8:40. Lorenzo asked for a chapter. I read it standing beside his bed, the book in both hands, and when he fell asleep mid-sentence, I stood in the dark for a moment listening to him breathe, the particular even rhythm of a child who trusts the world to hold still while he sleeps. I wished for his sake that it would. Caterina was already out. I tucked her blanket, left the door 2 inches open, and came back into the hall to find Antonio waiting at the base of the main stairs. He said nothing. He walked. I followed him into the interior of the house. Not the service wing where I spent my days, but the private corridor, dark wood and thick carpet. The kind of silence that accumulates in rooms where decisions have been made and not repeated. We stopped at a closed door. He knocked twice. In. He stepped back and let me through first. The study was large and spare. A desk of dark wood at the center. Clean, one lamp, a closed folder. Bookshelves along two walls ordered. Two chairs across the desk that had the look of chairs rarely used for sitting. The Commendatore stood at the window with his back to us, one hand in his pocket, the other turning a pen slowly between two fingers without looking at it. The motion of a man whose mind was already working and whose hands needed something to do while it did. He turned. I had seen him 9 times, corridors, across rooms, once in the garden from a distance. I had never been in the same space with him when there was nothing else to look at. He was taller than distance suggested. He looked at me with full, careful attention, none of it visible on the surface. "You're the babysitter," he said. "Anna Petrov," I said. "Yes." Something shifted at the name, not recognition, but the brief recalibration of a man realizing he should have known something he didn't. He closed it off before it became anything. "Sit." I sat. He stood at the edge of the desk, not behind it, at it. The lamp put his face in partial shadow. "Antonio gave me the summary," he said. "I want it from you." I told him. Time, location, 3 men, the badge. Concise, specific. This room required clarity, not elaboration. When I reached the part about what the badge was actually for, I said it plainly. It wasn't taken to open a door. It was taken to prove a door existed. He listened without moving. 7 seconds of silence. "You went back to work this morning," he said. "After this?" "Yes. With a probable rib fracture. It's manageable." He looked at me then with something that was neither admiration nor pity, but more careful than both. The look of a man recataloguing something he had previously marked unimportant. "The badge wasn't the point," he said. Not a question. "No," I said. Someone wanted proof this household had an exposed position. I was the exposure. A silence. "They found the right one," he said, and I understood it was not a compliment. It was the admission of a man who had left something open and not noticed, because the opening had a face he had never bothered to look at. He set the pen down on the desk. "You'll have an escort for your morning route," he said. "Starting tomorrow." "I don't need—" "Starting tomorrow." Not louder. Just final. I looked at him. He looked at me. The lamp hummed between us. "All right," I said. He nodded once, small, contained, and lifted the clinic report without looking at me again. The meeting was over. I stood and walked to the door. I had my hand on the frame when he spoke. "Petrov." I stopped. "Every copy of that documentation," he said. "Keep them all." I turned enough to see him. He was still looking at the report, not at me. "I intend to," I said. I left. The corridor was cool and quiet around me. I walked back toward the staff stairs with my right hand pressed flat against my side and thought about the way he had said they found the right one, like a man calculating the distance between what he had known and what he should have, and not liking what the gap revealed. Something had shifted in that room. I didn't know yet whether it was good or dangerous. In this house, most things were both. The escort was a man named Marco, one of Antonio's security detail, not presented as a guard or a bodyguard, just as someone who would walk the route with me starting the following morning. Antonio told me this in under 20 seconds and gave no further explanation, which I had come to understand was his version of complete briefing. Marco was in his 30s, unremarkable in the way that professional inconspicuousness requires genuine effort. Average height, a coat that said nothing, a face that wouldn't hold in memory past 10 minutes. He met me at my building's front door at 5:10. We walked to the mansion in silence, him 2 paces behind and slightly left, close enough to matter and far enough not to crowd. We went through the Piazza Mercato Square, not the walkway. We did not discuss this. He simply angled left before the archway opening and I followed, and the 4 minutes I had been saving for 3 months dissolved into the morning air without ceremony. I did not go through that walkway again. Back at the mansion, Antonio had already pulled security footage from 3 cameras around Piazza Mercato. He showed me the printouts in his office, a small room off the service corridor, organized with the precision of a man who distrusted clutter, and laid out 3 stills, figures at the walkway entrance at 5:13, 5:14, 5:16. Faces angled down or deliberately turned. 1 clear frame of the construction jacket. A partial plate from a vehicle parked on the far corner. "Enough to work with?" I asked. "Enough to start," he said. He had also logged a formal incident report in the household security system, time-stamped, cross-referenced with the clinic documentation. The entry read, "Badge D119, confirmed theft by coercion, 05:15, via Mercado Loading Bay Corridor. Staff member sustained injury. External origin confirmed." He handed me a copy without being asked. I put it in the zippered pocket of my bag alongside the clinic report. 2 pieces of documentation now, both time-stamped, both aligned. The beginnings of something that could not be argued away. The household shifted around me in the days that followed, in ways small enough to miss if you weren't measuring. Signora Bettini began using my name. Not every time. A deliberate deployment, reserved for moments that had previously received only a look in my direction. The kitchen staff, who had managed to share a workspace with me for 3 months without sustained eye contact, now found occasion to speak. One of the groundskeepers held the side gate for me on a morning it was sticking. Small adjustments. A household updating its variables. None of it was warmth. It was reassessment, the same recalibration I had seen in Antonio's face, and in the Commendatore's. I understood the mechanism, and did not mistake it for affection. What mattered was that it was real, and it was better than what I had before. On the 3rd morning, the Commendatore passed me in the east corridor. He stopped. "Escort working out," he said. Not a question. "Yes. Antonio says you changed the route. The walkway isn't worth 4 minutes anymore." He looked at me for a moment. A held consideration, a thought that closed before it fully formed. Then, "Good." And he walked on. 43 rooms in this mansion, and I had spent 3 months learning to disappear inside all of them. Now he stopped in corridors to ask about my morning route. I noted it, filed it carefully, and said nothing to anyone about what it meant. Because I didn't know yet, and in this house, moving on incomplete information was exactly how you ended up on one knee on a loading bay walkway at 5:15 in the morning. I was learning to wait. On the 5th day, Antonio came to find me at noon with a name. The partial plate had traced to a vehicle registered to a small freight company in the Southern Dock District. The company's principal was connected through 2 intermediary businesses to a family called Ferrante. "Ferrante," I said. "You know it." "I've heard it," I said. And that was almost true. The name had come through the walls of this house twice in 3 months, both times in Antonio's voice, in the register he used when something required close watching. I hadn't located it then. I was locating it now. "Sergio Ferrante," Antonio said. He said it with the particular weight people give names that carry history. His father and the Commendatore's father built competing operations in this city for 30 years. The elder Ferrante died 4 years ago. Sergio inherited what remained and has been trying to keep it from contracting ever since. And the badge was part of that. The badge was a message, he said. Whether to open negotiations or to establish leverage, We're still determining which Ferrante intended. He intended both, I said. A message that works either way depending on how it's received. If the Commendatore responds with caution, it's leverage. If he responds with negotiation, it opens a door. The badge is ambiguous on purpose. Antonio looked at me with the expression I had now catalogued specifically as his reclassification look, the one he used when a thing turned out to be more than its filing. The vehicle connects to two of the men on the footage, he said. We're moving to identify them. How long? Days, maybe less. A pause. You'll need to come in when we have them, to confirm. I know what they look like, I said. Yes, he said. That's exactly why. I called Mara at noon the way I had promised. Anything, she said, her word for urgency, unchanged since we were teenagers. A name, Ferrante. We're not there yet. A silence. Then, we. I heard what she was hearing, the shift from I to we. From a woman handling a situation alone to one with something behind her. Yes, I said. Another silence. Then, Papa's appointment is Thursday. The specialist moved the surgery window. He needs it scheduled before the end of the month, or he loses the operating room slot. I pressed my right hand flat against my side, still tender at the same fixed point, still present each morning like a reminder I hadn't asked for. $54,800 and a window closing and a father counting ceiling tiles 300 miles away. I'll have the money, I said. Anna, I'll have it. Thursday. I didn't know yet how, but something had shifted in the past 5 days. And I had learned recently that some doors that look impossible from the outside are simply a matter of who is standing beside you when you reach them. I was beginning to understand, slowly, and without letting myself rely on it yet, that I was no longer reaching alone. The identification happened on the 7th day. Antonio had them in a room off the security office, not the police, not yet, because that was not how this household operated, and I was learning the architecture of that choice without being asked to endorse it. 3 men, 3 chairs, a one-way glass panel between me and the room that smelled of cleaning product and held cold air. I stood at the glass with Antonio beside me. The first man sat with his construction jacket folded across his knee. Different jacket, same fit, same jaw. The second was taller than the walkway had let me read him, his arms not crossed now but resting on his knees in the posture of a man deciding how much of himself to give up. The third was young, much younger than 5:15 in the morning had let me see, 22 at most, sitting very still with his eyes on the table and the color gone from his face. All 3, I said. Antonio made a note. You're certain? The first man's jaw, the second one's height. The third was behind me. I heard him more than saw him, but he made a sound when the first one struck me. I stopped. It was him. Antonio went into the room. I stayed at the glass. What followed was not dramatic. It was methodical. He set a folder on the table and opened it to the security stills, the Piazza Mercato camera frames, the partial plate, the vehicle registration, the freight company, the chain of intermediary businesses ending at the Ferrante name. He laid them out one by one, giving each man time to understand what was already known before asking for what wasn't. The first man held the longest. He studied each photograph with the careful blankness of someone performing composure. Then Antonio reached the last document, a financial record. I couldn't read it from the glass, but I saw the number at the bottom catch the man's eye. He looked at it for 3 seconds. Then he looked at his hands. He started talking. His name was Dino Casale, 26. His older brother had borrowed $11,000 from a Ferrante operation 2 years prior and died in a road accident before repaying it. The debt transferred, informally, in the way these transfers always happened, which was, Sergio Ferrante decided it did, and no one in the Casale family had the leverage to argue. Dino had been making payment through service rendered. The walkway was his second such service. One more, he had been told, and the debt died with it. He said all of this in the flat tone of a man reporting facts about someone else's life. Only when he reached his brother did his jaw tighten once, briefly, and then go still. The tall man was Luca Bruni, 29. He gave his name, and then said almost nothing for the first 10 minutes, not to protect Ferrante, but because, as he eventually said, he didn't see the point of explaining loyalty to someone who would only call it something else. He had grown up 2 streets from the Ferrante distribution hub. Sergio Ferrante had paid his mother's rent when her landlord threatened eviction and had not asked to be repaid. Luca had been running errands for the family since he was 14 and considered himself bound by it. He said this with a flat dignity that was harder to dismiss than defiance would have been. He had not known, he said at the end, that Dino would hit me. He said it once, without elaboration, and then went silent. The third man was Teo Mancini, 22. He had been close to crying since before Antonio sat down. When the photographs were laid out, he pressed both hands flat on the table and said, "I didn't know it was going to be like that." "Like what?" Antonio said. He said intimidation. Take the badge, scare her, prove a point. He didn't say. He stopped, started again. She went down. That wasn't what I came for. "Why did you come?" A long pause. Then, "I owe Ferrante money. Different situation." He said one job cleared it. His voice dropped. "I'm 22. I needed it cleared." He answered every subsequent question without hesitation. Sergio Ferrante's instructions, the exact phrasing, the time and location of the briefing, and the name of the man who had delivered the order on Ferrante's behalf. That last piece was what Antonio brought back to me at the glass. "Ferrante didn't deliver the order himself," he said. "He used an intermediary, someone who works inside the Port Authority." "Deliberate distance," I said. "Yes, he's insulated." A pause. "But Mancini has the intermediary's name, a date, and a location. That's enough for the Commendatore to decide what to do with it." I was in the East Corridor at 7 that evening when I heard the study door open harder than usual. Not a slam. The Commendatore was not a man who slammed doors. But the latch caught with more force than it needed to, and his footsteps coming into the corridor carried a different quality than the ones I had spent 3 months cataloging. Slightly less controlled, the weight distributed forward. He stopped when he saw me. I was carrying Katerina's blanket to the linen room. She had dragged it down 2 flights again and abandoned it on the hall bench, a ritual she performed once a week with complete commitment. I had no reason to be in this corridor except the blanket, and it was a thin enough reason that I considered making myself smaller. I didn't. "Mancini gave Antonio a name," he said. "I know. I was at the glass." A flicker of recalibration across his expression, still not fully accustomed to me as witness rather than furniture. "Ferrante has leverage inside the Port Authority," he said. "Which means I can't move through official channels without the risk of the move being reported back before it lands." He said it the way a man says something aloud, because the thought needs air, not because he is asking for anything. "Then you move quietly," I said. "Or you wait for him to move first, and make sure you're ready when he does." The corridor held still. "He will move first," the Commendatore said. "It's his greatest competence and his worst habit." I filed that sentence in the same place I filed everything in this house I might need later. Then I picked up the blanket and walked to the linen room. Behind me, I heard him stay in the corridor a moment longer than he needed to before his footsteps finally moved away. It was not much, but in a house where everything carried weight, a man standing still in a corridor because a woman had said something worth sitting with, that was not nothing. Sergio Ferrante's first move came on the 9th day. Antonio told me at noon in the kitchen corridor, his voice flat as always, the information delivered the way he delivered everything, precisely, without editorial. 3 Desideri import clearances had been flagged at the Port Authority for routine compliance review. The review was indefinite in duration, which in Port Authority language meant until someone decided otherwise. The shipments were commercial, textile equipment, architectural components for a Desideri construction project, and the hold would cost the household contractors and penalties for each day of delay. "He knows we identified the freight company," I said. "He knows we pulled the footage," Antonio said. "His Port Authority contact would have reported it. He's applying pressure to show us that our move was seen and that responding has a cost." But he didn't escalate physically. "No, this is measured." His expression didn't change. That's what makes him more dangerous than the alternative. The Commendatore resolved the hold the following morning through a direct conversation with the Port Authority director, a man who, I gathered from the particular silence that followed the call's mention, owed him something older and larger than a phone call. The clearances moved, the shipments released. The contractors absorbed a 24-hour penalty quietly, without ceremony. But I had seen the Commendatore's face in the corridor at 6 that evening, before the resolution. A slight tension in the jaw, the pen stilled in his fingers instead of turning. He had not anticipated the speed of Ferrante's counter-move, and the fact that it had cost him something small did not reduce the fact that it had cost him. He did not mention this to anyone. I did not mention that I had seen it. That was the unspoken economy developing between us, what we each observed and chose not to name. On the 10th day, Katerina got a fever. Nothing alarming, the low, persistent kind that makes small children heavy and difficult to reason with. She wanted to be held and then didn't, wanted her blanket and then kicked it off, wanted me to read and then fell asleep during the 3rd sentence and woke again when I stopped. I stayed 2 hours past my scheduled end time without being asked. I sat on the floor beside her bed with my back against the wall and read in the pale glow of the nightlight until her breathing evened out into something that held. The Commendatore appeared in the doorway at 9:10. He looked at his daughter sleeping, then at the book in my hands, then at the way I was sitting, back against the wall, slightly forward on my left to keep weight off my right side. The specific compensation I had been making for 10 days that I thought I was hiding. He had noticed. That was in his face. He came into the room without the chair. He sat down against the opposite wall, mirroring me without appearing to intend it. We were equidistant from Katerina. The nightlight made the room amber and small. He said nothing for a while. Neither did I. Then, quietly enough that it stayed in the room. "She does this. The fever. Every few weeks since her mother died." I kept my eyes on the book. "When did she die?" 3 years ago." A pause. "Katerina was 2, he said. "She doesn't remember. Lorenzo does a little. Enough to be careful with it." I thought about the way Lorenzo sometimes went very still when something in the household shifted. The way he held information close and came to conclusions quietly before saying them. 7 years old and already learning that some things you carry without putting down. "He watches you," I said. "When you come into a room, he checks your face before he reads anything else." A silence. Then, in a different register, lower, with the quality of something that had caught a man who had spent years being uncatchable. "I didn't know that." "You're not in the room when it happens," I said. "I am." Katerina shifted in her sleep. We both went still. She settled. The nightlight held its amber circle above her. "You should go home," he said. And there was something in it that wasn't dismissal. A restraint closing around something else. "She's not stable yet," I said. "Another hour." He looked at me then, directly, across the amber space between us. The longest he had held my eyes since the study. Something moved in his expression, and then was controlled, precisely, before it became visible. He nodded once. He stood. He looked at Katerina with a face he kept only for this room. Not the corridor face, not the study face. Something older and more careful than either. He left without another word. I stayed an hour and 40 minutes more. She stabilized around 11. I tucked her once, turned off the nightlight, and let myself out. In the corridor, I pressed my hand against my right side. The point was still there, fixed, present every morning like a debt I was managing rather than resolving. 10 days, and it had not diminished the way a bruise diminishes. Dr. Cordy's report was still in my bag. Imaging strongly recommended. I had been avoiding it because imaging meant a real answer. A real answer meant a recovery timeline. And a recovery timeline meant a conversation with myself about how long I could perform capable while managing a fracture I had never properly addressed. Tomorrow. The imaging. Tomorrow. I walked to the staff entrance with my bag over my left shoulder, and the quiet of the mansion settling behind me like something that had, without my full awareness, become less foreign than it used to be. Marco was at the service gate. He fell into position, 2 paces behind, slightly left, without a word. We took the long route in the dark, around the market square, past the florist beginning to open his shutters for early stock. At the corner where we usually parted, he stopped. "Antonio wants you to know," he said, "that Ferrante's intermediary at the Port Authority resigned this morning, effective immediately, no statement. I considered this. Pressure from above or fear from below. Antonio thinks both. That makes Ferrante's next move less predictable," I said. "Yes." He nodded. "Antonio thinks that too." He turned back toward the mansion. I walked the last 3 blocks alone in the early dark, turning it over. Ferrante had lost his Port Authority contact. Either the Commendatore had applied pressure upward, or Ferrante had cut the connection himself to protect against what the 3 men in the security room had already said. Either way, a chain had shortened. A man who operated through layers was now 1 layer less insulated. That was not victory. It was positioning. And positioning, I was learning, was what this world ran on before anything visible happened. The violence came later, and only when the positioning had already determined who would be left standing when it did. I reached the bus stop and checked my phone. A message from Mara, sent at 11:43. Papa slept through the night. First time in 2 weeks. I read it twice. Then I put the phone in my bag and stood in the pre-dawn cold and let myself feel it, just for the length of 1 careful, shallow breath. Then I got on the bus. The imaging center on Via Falcone opened at 7. I went the next morning, before work, while Marco waited on the pavement outside with his hands in his pockets and no questions. The center was clean and quiet. 3 waiting chairs, a reception desk, a corridor that smelled of antiseptic and climate control. The technician was efficient and impersonal in the way that people become when they perform the same precise task dozens of times a day. "Right side?" she said. "Right side." She positioned me, took 4 images, and sent me back to the waiting area with the flat instruction that results would be ready in 40 minutes. I sat in the second chair. Marco had come in from the cold and was sitting by the door, reading nothing, watching everything. The particular quality of alertness that looked like patience but wasn't. 42 minutes later, the radiologist came out. His name was Dr. Marchetti, a compact man in his 50s with reading glasses on a cord and the unhurried manner of someone who had learned that the news he delivered required stillness from the messenger. He set the X-ray film on the light board in the consultation room and traced the finding with a pen. "Rib number 6, he said. "Right lateral aspect. You have a confirmed hairline fracture here." The pen moved along a diagonal line, thin and pale against the blue-white of the image. And secondary bruising of the intercostal tissue immediately adjacent. There's no displacement, nothing threatening the lung. But it is a fracture, not a contusion, and it has been there for... He looked at me. "How many days?" 11. He made a sound that was not quite a sigh. "You've been working through this," Yes. That explains the presentation, he said. Managed rather than rested. The fracture line is clean, which is good. But the tissue around it is more inflamed than it should be at 11 days, because it hasn't had the stillness it needed. He printed the imaging report, 2 pages, specific in the way clinical documents are specific, with the fracture location documented as right lateral, 6th rib, hairline, non-displaced, with associated intercostal tissue inflammation, and handed it to me with a separate care sheet. Complete rest for 2 weeks. Limited upper body movement. No lifting, no twisting. Deep breathing exercises twice daily to prevent secondary pulmonary complications from shallow breathing compensation. If you can't rest fully, he said, with the tone of a man who had been told this couldn't be done and had prepared his response accordingly. At minimum, no weight bearing on the right side, no overhead reach, and you sleep on your left. Every night, without exception. I folded the report. 1 question, I said. Full recovery. Realistic timeline. 6 weeks minimum. 8 if you continue working. A pause. 10 if you continue working the way you have been for the past 11 days. I thanked him. I took the film. I put both the report and the image into the zippered pocket of my bag, which now held 3 clinical documents about a fracture that had been growing its paper trail while I carried it through a household and pretended it was manageable. Marco stood when I came back to the waiting area. "All right," he said, which was the most words he had said to me in one direction at one time. "All right," I said. We walked to the mansion. I carried the bag on my left shoulder and breathed the way I had learned to breathe. Shallow enough to function, deep enough to keep. The cold air pressed against my right side like a hand applying gentle, continuous proof. 6 to 10 weeks. $54,800 and a surgery window closing and 2 children who needed someone to dress them in the morning, and my father counting ceiling tiles in a bed 300 miles away. I walked through the Desideri service entrance at 7:58 and went to work. By the afternoon, the fracture had become difficult to ignore in the way that fractures become difficult to ignore when they are tired of being ignored. It was not dramatic. No sudden spike. No collapse. Just the slow accumulation of 11 days of managed compensation, reaching a point where the management required more effort than it had yesterday. Each breath slightly shallower than the one before. A new tendency of my body to turn my whole torso, rather than twist at the waist when reaching for something. An adaptation so automatic by now I had stopped noticing it, until Signora Bettini noticed it. She found me in the 2nd floor linen room at 3 in the afternoon, and watched me reach for a shelf with the particular full-body economy of someone protecting their right side and said, "Go sit down." "I'm fine." "You're compensating," she said. "You have been for 11 days, and it is more pronounced today than it was yesterday, and I am telling you to go and sit down before the children come home from school and need you functional." I looked at her. She looked back with the expression of a woman who has been managing a large household for 20 years and has developed as a necessary professional tool the capacity to see through most forms of performance. I went and sat down. The sitting room on the 2nd floor was where I read to the children. Pale yellow walls, a low bookshelf along one side, 2 armchairs, and a footstool the children fought over every evening. I sat in the chair by the window and did nothing for 11 minutes, which was the longest I had sat still without a task in 11 days, and my body received it, like water received after something that had been too long without. I was still there when Antonio came in. He stood in the doorway with the imaging report in his hand, a copy, which meant he had collected it from somewhere, which meant someone had told him. He looked at the 2 pages, then at me, then at the way I was sitting. "Why didn't you have this done at day 1?" he said. "I needed to keep working." "You needed to keep this job." I didn't answer. He knew the answer. He set the report on the side table beside my chair, not sharply, but with a deliberateness that communicated something he wasn't going to say out loud, and left. 20 minutes passed. Then the Commendatore came in. He didn't knock. It was his house, and that was not something he did. But he paused in the doorway, the way he had paused in Katerina's doorway the night of her fever, reading the room before entering it. He came in. He did not sit. He picked up the imaging report from the side table and read it where he stood, and I watched his face do the thing it did when it received information it intended to process, rather than react to, a careful, controlled stillness that held the reaction inside without releasing it. He set the report down. 6th rib, he said. Yes. 11 days. Yes. He looked at me. Not the corridor look. Not the study look. Something more direct than either. Stripped of the management layer that usually sat between him and the people in his household. You walked through this every morning, he said. Dressed my children. Managed this house. Did not say a word. I said enough, I said. Antonio had the clinic report from day 1. The clinic report said probable fracture. He tapped the imaging copy once. This says confirmed. 6th rib. 11 days of inflammation because it wasn't rested. A pause. That is not the same thing. The room was quiet. Below us, through the window, the garden was gray with late afternoon. I couldn't lose this job, I said, plainly. No performance around it. He was quiet for a moment. The pen was not in his hands today. Nothing to turn, nothing to manage the waiting with. He stood with his hands still at his sides, and I understood, from 3 months of watching this man from corridors and rooms and garden distances, that the stillness without the pen was a different kind of stillness. The surgery, he said. Your father. I looked at him. He had been listening, in the study that night, and whatever Antonio had assembled since. The window closes at the end of the month, I said. How much remains? It was not a casual question. There was a direction to it I could feel before I understood what it was aimed at. Enough to manage, I said carefully. That is not what I asked. I held his eyes. He held mine. The afternoon light shifted outside the window. 14,000, I said, against the full amount. He nodded once. Small, contained, the way he nodded when receiving information that had already changed the next decision. And the decision was already made, and the nod was simply acknowledgement of its arrival. You'll have it by Thursday, he said. I felt something move in my chest, not the fracture, something adjacent to it, older and more complicated. I kept it out of my face with the same discipline I had kept everything out of my face for 11 days. That's not, I started. It's an advance, he said, against future salary. The briefest pause. We can discuss the terms when you're not sitting in a chair because my housekeeper sent you to rest. Something moved in his expression then, controlled, but not fully. A fractional warmth, there and then gone, like a light through a doorway that closes before you can see the room. I looked at the report on the side table. My name at the top. The fracture documented in the second line. A thin, pale diagonal across the 6th rib on the image I had been carrying for 11 days while telling myself I was managing. All right, I said. He picked up the report and took it with him when he left. I sat in the yellow sitting room for a long time after that, listening to the house settle around me, and thought about what it meant to be seen by someone who had previously not looked. Thursday came with a bank notification at 7:41 in the morning. I was at the service gate when it arrived, Marco at my left, the cold pressing in from the east, the sky just beginning to decide on gray rather than black. I stopped walking and read the message twice. The transfer amount matched what had been discussed. The sender was listed as a Desideri administrative account, the reference line reading simply, Salary advance, A. Petrov, clean, documented. Exactly what he had said it would be. Marco glanced at me. All right, he said. Yes, I said. for the second time in a week, and the second time in my life that I meant it in a way that had weight behind it. I called Mara from the service corridor before the children were up. She answered on the second ring, which meant she had been awake, which meant she had been waiting. "It came through," I said. A silence. Then a sound I had not heard from Mara in 8 months. Something that released rather than held. Not crying, exactly. The sound just before. "I'll call the specialist," she said. "Today." "Tell him end of month," I said. "Make him hold the window. He'll hold it." She was already in motion. I could hear the particular quality of Mara moving with purpose, which was one of the most reliable sounds I knew. "Anna." "I know." "No, I mean..." She stopped, started again. "You did it." I pressed my hand against my right side, the 6th rib. Still there, still fixed, but resting now, actually resting, because last night for the first time in 12 days, I had slept on my left side through the night without waking to manage what was happening on the right. "We did it," I said. "Go call him." She went. That evening, the Commendatore passed the sitting room at 8, after the children were down, and saw me at the window with the care sheet Dr. Marchetti had given me. The breathing exercises, twice daily, which I had been neglecting and was now attempting with the concentrated focus of someone learning that neglect has a compound interest. He stopped in the doorway. I kept breathing. In for 4 counts, slow, deliberate, against the resistance, and out. He came in and sat in the other chair, the children's chair, without the footstool argument. He did not take out the pen. "The surgery is scheduled," I said between breaths. "End of the month." "Good." A pause. "How is the rib?" "Better than yesterday." I set the care sheet down. "I slept." Something moved across his expression. Not the warmth I had seen and lost and catalogued from the day before, but something quieter than that. A man noting that a thing he was responsible for, even indirectly, had improved. "You should have told me sooner," he said. "About the debt. Not the injury. I understand the injury. The debt." I looked at him. "You hadn't learned my name yet." A silence. "No," he said. "I hadn't." He said it without the management layer. No deflection, no redirect. Just the plain acknowledgement of a man who had let something go unlooked at for long enough that it had required violence to make itself visible. It was the closest thing to an apology that I believed he knew how to deliver, and I received it as such. We sat in the yellow sitting room for a while longer, not speaking, not needing to. The nightlight in Katerina's room made a thin line of amber under her door across the hall. Below us, the city moved through its evening in its usual way, indifferent and unaware. When I stood to leave, he stood too, a reflex contained immediately, but present. "Thursday," he said. "Thursday," I said. He meant the surgery window. I understood it was the closest he would come in this corridor, in this house, to saying, "I know what that cost you to carry. I know what it means to have it handled." I put on my coat in the entrance hall, tucked my badge, and went out into the cold evening with Marco at my left, and the city opening its usual ordinary darkness ahead of me. For the first time in 12 days, I breathed all the way in. The surgery happened on a Tuesday. Mara texted me at 7:42 when my father went through the theater doors. I read it in the Desideri garden during Katerina's outdoor hour, standing near the far hedge where the reception was better, the phone warm against my cold hand. Lorenzo was 6 feet away, building a maze from collected sticks with the focused seriousness he gave to most of his projects. He looked up. "Good news," he said. "Very good news," I said. He accepted this and went back to his maze. Mara called 3 hours later. The surgery had gone as planned. The surgeon's phrase was clean decompression, 2 words I had not expected to find so beautiful. My father was in recovery. He would be in significant pain for several weeks and restricted for months. But the trajectory had changed. He was moving toward a ceiling he could eventually reach rather than a floor that kept dropping. I took the call in the service corridor. When it ended, I stood against the wall for a full minute with my phone in my hand and breathed. Carefully, since the 6th rib was still present and still mine, and felt, for the first time in 8 months, that the weight across my shoulders was not the same weight it had been when I woke up. It was lighter, by exactly $54,800. That evening my father called from the recovery room. His voice was thick with anesthesia, and he said my name twice before he said anything else, and both times it sounded like something he had been saving. "I know what you did," he said. "Sleep," I said. He slept. The household knew something had shifted. Not because I told anyone, I told no one, but because 12 days of managed fracture and tightly held pressure had produced a particular quality in me that the people in this house had been reading without naming, and its absence was as readable as its presence. Signora Bettini said nothing. She handed me the children's schedule for the week, and then, as I was turning to go, said, "Your father's procedure was scheduled for this week, I believe." I looked at her. "I hope it went well," she said, and turned back to her clipboard. I went upstairs and dressed Lorenzo for school, and told Katerina 3 times to put on her second shoe, and the ordinary relentlessness of it was not a burden. It was simply real, and real things that morning felt like enough. That afternoon, when Lorenzo came home from school and ran into the sitting room with a drawing he had made, a house with 4 windows and a yellow tree that bore no resemblance to anything in the Desideri garden but was clearly important to him, he pushed it at me with the proprietary certainty of a child who has decided you need what he has made. I took it and looked at it and told him it was perfect. I meant it. He could tell. The Commendatore asked to see me in the study on Thursday evening, not through Antonio, through Signora Bettini, who knocked on the sitting room door at 8:15, with the expression of someone delivering a message, and not its interpretation, and said, "He'd like a word." I went downstairs, the study, the same desk, the same lamp, the same closed folder at the center. He was standing at the window again. I had come to understand this as his default position in this room when something required saying. The window as a place to have already decided before he turned. He turned. "Your father," he said. "Surgery went well," I said. "Clean result. He starts rehabilitation in 3 weeks." Something in his expression, not the fractional warmth, something quieter. The satisfaction of a man whose action produced the result he intended, offered without explanation. "Good," he said. He moved to the desk and opened the folder, not reactively, for reference, but deliberately, already decided. He set it open and turned it toward me. A contract, 2 pages, the Desideri household crest at the top. "I'm restructuring your position," he said. "The role of babysitter ends this week. The new title is Household Children's Director. Your responsibilities include the children's full daily schedule, their education coordination, medical appointments, and accompanying them to all household events where their presence is required." A pause. "The salary is adjusted accordingly." I looked at the contract. The number in the compensation line was not the adjusted figure I had been calculating since the advance. It was larger than that. I read both pages. He waited. The pen turned once between his fingers and stopped. "The household events," I said. "That includes social engagements. It includes the annual foundation dinner, 2 weeks from Friday. The children will be present for the first hour. You'll accompany them." I understood what that meant, not logistically, but in the household sense. The annual Desideri Foundation dinner was the event at which the full architecture of this family's position in the city was made visible. Staff who attended did so in a specific capacity. The capacity he was assigning me was not invisible. "This is not just about the children," I said. He held my eyes. No, it is not. After the Ferrante incident, he said, it became clear that the position of invisible staff member is not one I can continue to assign to you in good conscience. You have information about this household that requires a commensurate level of protection and integration. He paused. And you have demonstrated a quality of judgment that this household would use poorly by keeping it in the service corridor. I looked at the contract, my name at the top. The fracture had cost me something. The fracture had also made me visible in the one house in this city where being visible changed the trajectory. I'll need to review the terms, I said. Of course. He closed the folder and slid it across the desk. Take it tonight. I took it. At the door, I paused. The foundation dinner. Ferrante will be watching. Yes, he said. He will be. Then you should know what you're putting into the room with him when you bring me. A silence. I know exactly what I'm putting into that room, he said, with the certainty of a man who had decided this before the conversation began, and was simply giving me time to arrive. I went home that night with the contract under my arm, and thought about the thing I had done. Survive, persist, stay present through 8 months of pressure, and 12 days of fracture and 1 night on a sick child's floor, and understood that it had not merely solved a problem, it had changed a position. And positions in this world had consequences I was only beginning to see. The foundation dinner was the kind of event that the city's better-dressed people attended in order to confirm, for one another, what they already knew about the order of things. Black tie, hosted annually at the Palazzo Aldini, with a charitable component that was genuine and a social component that was the real purpose. I learned this from Signora Bettini, who briefed me on the dinner the way she briefed me on everything, efficiently, completely, without asking whether I wanted the information. The children would attend the first hour, formal dress, they would be seen, presented briefly, and then I would take them home in the Desideri car while the evening continued without them. My role was presence and management. What do I wear? I said. She looked at me with the expression of a woman who had already solved this problem and was waiting for me to arrive at the question. She handed me a card, a dressmaker's address on Via Cantoni, a name written below it in her handwriting. Thursday appointment. It's arranged. I started to say that wasn't necessary. It is necessary, she said, not unkindly. You'll be in the room. The room will notice. Act accordingly. I went on Thursday. The dressmaker was a small, deliberate woman who took measurements in silence and produced, 5 days later, a dress in deep navy that was appropriate and quietly precise, the kind of clothing that says nothing obvious and communicates everything that matters. I hung it in my apartment that night and looked at it for a while before I went to bed. The call came 2 days before the dinner. Antonio told me about it afterward, in the security office with the door closed. Ferrante had called the Commendatore's private line, a number not listed anywhere, known only to a short list of people, at 9 p.m. The Commendatore had taken it in the study and said very little while Ferrante spoke. What Ferrante said, near the end of the call, was this. You told the girl. You hadn't learned her name yet. That was honest of you. A verbatim line from the yellow sitting room. A private exchange with no witnesses. A room where, as far as anyone had known, nothing was recorded. Antonio had swept the study after the call. Behind the third shelf of the east bookcase, behind a volume of architectural history, its spine unbroken, he found a listening device the size of a coat button. Battery-operated, transmitting on a frequency his standard sweep hadn't been calibrated for. He had needed updated equipment, which he had sourced the same night. He showed me the device in a sealed evidence bag. I looked at it without touching it. How long? I said, based on the battery capacity in the model. 3 weeks, possibly 4. 3 weeks. Which meant it was there before the conversation about my father's surgery, before the contract, before I had sat in that room and been more honest than I had been with anyone in this household. Ferrante had heard all of it. The Commendatore wants to proceed with the dinner, Antonio said, because pulling back confirms he reacted. Yes. He looked at the bag. He also wants you to understand that the conversation was heard. He considered whether to tell you and decided you had the right to know. I thought about that. A man who operated in layers of control, choosing to be transparent about a vulnerability. That was not nothing. What changed his calibration? I said. And I meant Ferrante's. The choice to use a private line and quote a private conversation 2 days before a public event. He's establishing that he can reach inside, Antonio said. It's not leverage yet. It's a demonstration that leverage exists. He's about to lose something, I said. Something that's making him push faster than his usual tempo. Antonio looked at me. What makes you say that? Port Authority contact gone. 3 men identified and held. He's compressed. Compressed men move before they're ready. I paused. He'll be at the dinner. He has a foundation membership, Antonio confirmed. He's attended 7 consecutive years. I nodded. Then we go. The Palazzo Aldini was high ceilings and gilded cornices, and a staircase wide enough for 12 to ascend without acknowledging each other. The foundation dinner occupied the main hall and 2 reception rooms, its charitable purpose genuine, and its social purpose the real one. I brought the children in at 7:15. Lorenzo had negotiated the terms of engagement on the drive over. He was required only to be polite when spoken to and to eat whatever appeared without commenting. He had accepted these as fair terms. Katerina had fallen asleep in the car and woken at arrival with a line on her cheek from the seat seam, already reaching for my hand. The room registered our entry the way rooms do. Noted, recalibrated, resumed. But not without a pause. The children were expected. The woman behind them, in navy, holding a 5-year-old's hand with a calm that made it look like a decision rather than a duty, was not expected in the form she took. The Commendatore moved through the first reception with the economy of a man executing protocol. He didn't look at me, but twice, within peripheral range, I caught the slight alteration. The quality of knowing exactly where someone is without looking, that develops only for people who have become, without announcement, significant. Sergio Ferrante arrived at 8:20. I recognized him before Antonio's briefing had even been necessary, because what had been described was entirely visible in how he occupied the room. Mid-50s, impeccably dressed, with the ease of a man whose announcement always arrived before he did. The face of someone who had inherited a war and found he preferred it to the alternative. He found me at 8:31, not the Commendatore. Me. He stopped at my elbow at the edge of the hall, where Katerina was examining a low painting, and Lorenzo had been temporarily claimed by a family acquaintance asking about school. Miss Petrov, he said, conversationally, as if we had met before. I said nothing. You've settled well into the position. A glance at Katerina, appraising, not warm. The children respond to you. It's visible. A brief pause. I hope your father's recovery is progressing. He said it with complete social pleasantness, the way a man delivers information dressed as courtesy. He moved on before I could answer. Back into the current of the room, unhurried, already in conversation with someone else. I kept my expression where it was. My right hand found Katerina's shoulder and stayed. He had said nothing threatening. Nothing that could be reported as threat. Just 7 words that confirmed he knew my father's name, his surgery, and the private shape of my life, delivered with the smile of someone reminding you that your walls have a door he can already open. A victory that looked exactly like good manners. That was his greatest competence. And the most dangerous thing about it was that it had worked. I felt it work. The cold thread of it moving up the back of my neck while Katerina's small hand pressed into mine, and the room continued its elegant, oblivious evening all around us. Taking the children out at 8:45 put us through the East Service corridor, the family exit, which staff used to avoid moving children through the crowded main reception. I knew this because Signora Bettini had briefed me on it, and because I had spent the week before the dinner mapping the Palazzo Aldini's staff routes the same way I had spent 3 months mapping the Desideri mansion. Quietly, completely, without announcing I was doing it. The east corridor ran past the catering staging station for the main hall. As we moved through, Caterina on my hip, Lorenzo one step ahead, I saw it, a single glass on the secondary preparation table. Separated from the service grouping, marked with a small piece of white adhesive tape on the base. Not a damage marker. Those were red. This was white. Deliberately placed, deliberately isolated. I had learned the marking system from Signora Bettini during my 3rd week. If you see a marked glass that isn't in the damage log, she had said, in the efficient way she delivered everything worth knowing, it means someone outside the standard chain handled it. Report it immediately. I set Caterina on her feet, took out my phone, and photographed the glass and its exact position on the table. I texted Antonio the image with 4 words. Catering table, east corridor. His response came in under a minute. We have it. Keep moving. I kept moving. The children went home in the Desideri car. Lorenzo spent the drive explaining the painting Caterina had examined, with the authority of a child who has decided he understood something an adult missed. Caterina fell asleep against my arm before we reached the first junction. At home, I got them settled. Lorenzo's 30 minutes of unwinding, Caterina's blanket, tucked twice, the quiet after. Antonio called at 10:40. Residue confirmed, he said. The glass was taken for testing. We have the catering staff member on camera accessing the preparation table. His credential was registered under a Ferrante-connected foundation membership. I said nothing. You read a tape mark on a glass in a moving service corridor, he said, while carrying a child. Signora Bettini told me the system, I said. I remembered it. A pause that held more than it said. The Commendatore wants to see you in the morning. I looked at my phone after the call ended. The dark apartment, the late hour. A father resting on the other side of surgery, and a man at a formal dinner across the city who had just had his glass exchanged because I had learned which marks on service tables meant danger. My phone lit up again. Mara. A message, not a call. She was trying not to alarm me. But Mara called when it was nothing. She messaged when the thing was something she needed to contain. Anna. Something's wrong. Call me. I called her immediately. She answered on the first ring. They have Mara, she said. And then I heard the breath that told me she meant herself. She was the one calling. She was safe. I mean, they were following me. Someone followed me home tonight. I saw him twice, and then I didn't. And then my neighbor called and said there was a man outside my building asking which floor I lived on. I was already on my feet. Lock the door, I said. Don't open it. I'll call Antonio. Anna, lock the door. Antonio called back 2 minutes after Mara. Car is 4 minutes out, he said. Tell her to stay inside. Wait for the phrase. I called her back. She answered immediately. The car is coming, I said. Stay inside. Don't open the door until... A sound on the line. Not a crash. More precise than that. The specific weight of a door that didn't wait to be opened. Then Mara's breath, sharp and immediately cut off. Then movement. Footsteps that weren't hers. Mara. The line stayed open. I heard ambient sound. Something scraping. A second door. Outdoor air. Then nothing. The call ended. I stood in the corridor with the dead line against my ear. Then I called Antonio. They have her, I said. A beat. How long? Seconds. The car just reached the building. A pause that held everything he wasn't going to say out loud. She's not there. The Commendatore called 3 minutes later. His voice was at the register it used when a situation had already changed shape, and the only question left was how to move inside it. Ferrante took her, he said. Come in. The mansion at midnight breathed differently, quieter and more watchful, lights reduced to essential. Antonio's team moving through the lower floors with the unhurried speed of people executing a plan made quickly but correctly. The Commendatore was at the desk when I reached the study. Not the window, the desk. The deciding was done. A map of the southern dock district lay open in front of him, annotated in Antonio's handwriting, 3 Ferrante positions marked, and a 4th circled. "He's been at the warehouse on Via Ferrara since 10, Antonio said from the corner. "He didn't go home after the dinner. He was planning for this response before the dinner ended," I said. "He has 2 men on the route from the north gate," Antonio said. "Disruption team, not ambush. Delay us long enough for him to move." I looked at the map, looked at the route's edge where it passed Piazza Mercato. "The loading bay walkway is 40 meters from his second position," I said. "There's a city-owned camera on the archway, not Ferrante's, not in his surveillance plan. It covers the walkway entrance and the street corner where his man is standing. Pull that feed now, and you have him on camera in position before anything happens." Antonio was already on his phone. "And don't use the north gate," I said. "The east service entrance has a different sightline. His disruption team can't see it from where they're placed. They won't know we've moved until we're already around them." The Commendatore looked at me across the desk, the lamp between us. 3 months ago, I had been furniture in his corridors. "You mapped this building the way you mapped my house," he said. "I map every place I work," I said. "Old habit." He held my eyes for a moment. Then, "East Gate," he said to Antonio. "East Gate," Antonio confirmed. The raid moved at 5:15. I know the time because I was watching the service corridor clock, the same numerals in the same position as the morning of the walkway. 5:15. And the city held its breath the same way it always held it before the light committed to arriving. The warehouse on Via Ferrara was secured in 11 minutes. Antonio's team, the Commendatore's legal representatives, and 2 investigators from a unit that operated in the precise space between official authority and the Desideri family's reach. Ferrante's disruption team was already neutralized. The Piazza Mercato camera feed had given Antonio their exact positions in time to approach from behind. Mara was in the back office of the warehouse. Antonio's voice came over the radio at 5:28, 13 minutes after the raid began. She was conscious, seated against the far wall, hands zip-tied in front of her, a bruise forming at her left temple, where she had been pushed against a doorframe when they took her. One of Antonio's men cut the ties. She didn't cry. She looked at him and asked what time it was. 5:28, he told her. "Tell Anna," she said. He told me over the radio, and I was standing at the service corridor clock when it came through. The same clock face, the same position of the minute hand as the morning of the walkway. And I pressed my palm flat against the wall and held it there until the room was solid again. At 5:41, my phone rang. Mara. I let it ring twice because my hands were not entirely steady. "Anna." "I know," I said. "I know." Sergio Ferrante was brought to the Commendatore's study at 6:10. Not the warehouse. Not a neutral location. Here, dark wood and ordered shelves, and the desk that had once been the room I had no reason to enter. Antonio's men brought him to the door, and then stepped back. He came in, the way he had entered every room I had ever seen him enter, as though a rival were a kind of authority. He looked at the desk, at the recording device Antonio had placed at the corner, at the documents laid out in a precise row across the surface, at me, standing to the left. He had prepared for this. On the table he carried a leather document case, and from it, before the Commendatore could speak, he produced a counter-document. A manufactured paper trail suggesting the Commendatore had prior knowledge of the assault on me, had used it as pretext, the salary advance time to manufacture cooperation. Dates, internal figures, a forged memo bearing the Desideri crest. Ferrante set it on the desk with the composed certainty of a man who had built this exit before he needed it. "Before this proceeds," he said, "you'll want to consider what mutual disclosure produces for both parties." The Commendatore said nothing. I opened my bag. I laid the documents on the desk, one at a time. The clinic report from Via Oberdan, time-stamped 5:35 a.m. the morning of the assault. Antonio's incident log, time-stamped 6:52 the same morning. The imaging report from Via Falconi, 11 days later, 7:48 a.m. The contract, 3 weeks after the assault. The bank transfer confirmation, 7:41 a.m., precisely dated. Every document in sequence, each one carrying a timestamp that preceded and disproved every date in Ferrante's manufactured trail. I had kept every copy, as instructed. Ferrante's composed certainty didn't shatter. It retreated, the way a tide retreats without drama, simply no longer present. The Commendatore looked at him across the desk. A long silence, fully inhabited. "You raised your hand at her." Not loud, not built for the room. The kind of sentence that doesn't require volume because the room already understood the weight before it was spoken. Ferrante said nothing. "She was carrying a fractured rib through this house for 11 days, the Commendatore said. "She dressed my children. She managed her schedule. She documented everything because she had nothing except what she could prove, because you made her the exposure and then used her to send me a message." The silence after the words was precise and held. "You raised your hand at her." Ferrante's lawyer moved forward one step. Ferrante stopped him with 2 fingers. He looked at the table, at the recording device. At the gray light coming through the study window, dawn fully arrived outside, the iron color gone, replaced by the pale specific gold of a morning that had taken all night to come. "The surrender document," he said, the voice of a man conserving what remained. Antonio produced it, 1 page. Ferrante read it with the attention of someone confirming the boundary of what he was conceding. He signed it, on camera, in the Commendatore's study, 6:22 a.m., and the city turning toward its morning outside the window, ordinary and indifferent, entirely unaware. Mara came through the service door at 6:50, brought in from the raid site by 2 of Antonio's team. She had a field dressing at her left temple, and someone's spare jacket over her call center shirt, and she looked exactly like herself. The particular quality Mara had of being entirely present even inside the worst of what had happened to her. She came through the door and looked at me and said nothing, just put her arms around me and held on, and I let her, standing still in the corridor with my right hand pressed carefully against my ribs and my face against my sister's shoulder. "Papa's second night," she said into my hair. "I know," I said. "I read your message." She pulled back and looked at me. The corridor was quiet. Above us, through the ceiling, I could hear Lorenzo beginning to wake, the particular movement of a 7-year-old deciding whether morning was worth committing to. "Is it over?" Mara said. I thought about it, the signed document, the timestamps lined up on the desk, the dawn that had come on schedule regardless. "Yes," I said. She exhaled. I exhaled with her. Upstairs, Lorenzo made the decision about morning and called my name. I went up. The mansion was quiet in the way it only got quiet after something large had passed through it. Not empty, but resting, the way a body rests after sustained effort. 48 hours since the raid. 47 since Ferrante's signature dried on the surrender document. The household had not returned to normal. It had returned to something adjacent to normal, slightly reconfigured, the way a room looks after furniture has been moved and then moved back, but not quite to the same positions. Mara was at the kitchen table when I came downstairs at 7. She had both hands around a coffee cup and her laptop open, and the particular quality of stillness she only had when she was deciding something, rather than resting. The dressing at her left temple had been replaced, smaller, cleaner, 2 days of healing visible in the reduced swelling around its edges. She looked up. "Sit down," she said. I sat. She turned the laptop toward me. The screen showed a confirmation email from the University of Legal Studies on Via Sant'Angelo. Subject: Enrollment application. Evening division, first year. Submitted 11:43 p.m. the night before, while I had been asleep. Her name in the applicant field. Reference number at the bottom. ELS 2026-04471. I looked at it, then at her. "I've been thinking about it since March," she said. "Since the dissolution papers." She took a sip of coffee. "I know how to read a document now. I want to know what to do with one." I said nothing. There was nothing that the screen hadn't already said better. "Evening classes," she said. "I keep the call center until the first semester settles." A pause. "I'm not asking for anything." "I know," I said. She turned the laptop back. That was Mara's version of the conversation being complete, not because it was small, but because she had decided it and the deciding was done, and she didn't need it witnessed any further. My phone was beside my coffee. I unlocked it and opened the email I had read 3 times since the evening before. From Dr. Renato Basile, Orthopedic Surgery and Rehabilitation, Clinica Nuova Speranza. Subject: Post-operative rehabilitation. Petrov Pavel. Case ID: CNS 2026-1187. Sent 2 days prior, 6:42 p.m. Dear Ms. Petrov, this is to confirm the commencement of your father's structured rehabilitation program beginning Thursday, 09 Thou. Please find attached the 12-week care plan signed by the surgical team. His post-operative imaging from Tuesday indicates clean decompression with no secondary complications. I had read it enough times I could have quoted it. I read it again anyway. Clean decompression. No secondary complications. 2 words that had traveled from the operating room to a clinic email to a phone screen to a kitchen table, and still carried the same weight they had the first time. I put the phone face down on the table. Mara looked at me. "Thursday," I said. "Thursday," she confirmed. The new badge was in the internal mail on my work desk, a small envelope with the Desideri administrative seal on the front. Inside, the replacement card, the household crest in the same position, but the access tier line beneath my name now read, Staff, Level 3, Children's Director. The card itself was a different color. Not white, a deep gray, which in this household's color language meant unrestricted interior access. Below my name, in smaller text, issued, this date. Authorization, Desideri Household Administration. Ref, DHR 0094, Petrov. I clipped it to the lanyard. Different weight than the old one. Not heavier, more specific. I found him in the study at 9, not at the desk. In the reading chair by the window, which I had never seen him use, with Katerina asleep across his lap and a book open on the armrest he wasn't reading. His right hand rested on Katerina's back, moving slightly with her breathing. He was looking at the window with the face he kept for this room only. He was exhausted. Not performed exhaustion. The real kind. The kind that lives in the jaw and the slight forward weight of the shoulders. His left hand rested on the armrest, and I caught it before I could decide not to. A small involuntary tremor, 1 second, controlled immediately. A man reaching the edge of the resources he usually kept invisible to everyone. He looked up when I came in. He didn't change the face. I set the folder I was carrying on the corner of the desk, the children's weekly schedule, routine, nothing urgent, and turned to go. Petrov. I stopped. The badge, he said. The new access tier. A pause. The authorization went through the household board. It's not provisional. I saw the reference number, I said. He nodded. His hand resumed its slow movement across Katerina's back. I looked at him. He looked at me. Katerina breathed between us, small and even. You're still here, he said. Not a question. The quietest form of something larger. I'm still here, I said. A silence that was different from the others. Not the silence of a room deciding, but of two people who had already decided and were arriving at the same place at the same time. He looked at Katerina's face for a moment, then back at me. I'm not asking you to stay on staff, he said, low, controlled. I'm asking you to stay. I held that, let it sit exactly as it was. I don't disappear, I said. Not into this house, not into this role. I stay as myself, or I don't stay at all. He held my eyes. Yes, he said. One word, without qualification or amendment. I crossed the room, careful of the rib, careful of Katerina, careful of everything that needed to be. I leaned down and pressed my mouth to his once, briefly, fully, with the weight of everything that had been accumulating since a corridor, since a lamp at a desk, since a man learning a name he should have known from the start. He stayed still. He let it be exactly what it was. When I straightened, he looked at me with the face he kept for this room, and something in it that had not been there before. Not warmth, something more permanent than warmth. The children need breakfast, he said. I know, I said. I went to the door. At the frame I paused, badge at my sternum, the new weight of it already familiar, and breathed in the way Dr. Marchetti had taught me, slow and deliberate against the sixth rib's fading resistance, not all the way healed, but further than yesterday. Behind me, the study held its quiet. Through the window, the city continued its ordinary morning, indifferent, unaware of what had been signed inside these walls at dawn, or what had just passed between two people in a room with a sleeping child. It didn't need to know. I had been invisible in this house once, furniture in its corridors, a function with a name no one had learned. I was not that anymore. Not because violence had made me visible, but because I had stayed visible after it, day after day, carrying proof in a zippered pocket until the proof was enough. That was the thing about being chosen. It didn't arrive like a verdict. It accumulated, the way trust accumulates quietly, in the space between what a person does when no one is watching and what remains when everything else has been taken away. I went to make the children breakfast. Before you go, I need to know two things. First, which moment hit you the hardest? Was it the walkway at 5:15, the study, or the dawn that finally came? Second, where in the world are you right now? Drop your city, your country, anything. I read every single one. This story deserves to travel far.